All right, so today we are going to continue doing a little bit with proofs. So we're going to use what we did yesterday with the Mary Loves Paul stuff. We're going to continue a little bit with this. Now remember, I know that this is brand new to you, okay? So I'm just going to ask you to be patient and try to do your best with me, okay? So number 1 through 4, it says, recall the 4 postulates that we use to prove that 2 triangles are congruent. So we just reviewed this, right? We have 4 ways that we prove that triangles are congruent. Brianna, what's the first way that you want to say? Side angle side is one of them. Belinda, what's another way? Yes, you do. The board. Look at the straight ahead and board. What's another way? There's side angle side. What else is there? Angle side angle. Patrick, what's another one? Angle angle side. And the last one that I'm missing, Crystal?
Side side side.
Side side side. Okay, so we are going to use these as our goals today to get to this place. Okay. So our goal is to get finished with this. Okay? We want to end up proving that triangles are congruent. So think about what we did yesterday. All right? We're going to use definitions, postulates, and theorems from our, quote, toolbox to write the proofs. So what that means are things that we have learned already that we know to be true. That's what we're going to use from our, quote, toolbox. Okay, so does anybody remember how the proof starts? What do you always start a proof with? The given, okay? So in this postulate, the given, it says, is that AE bisects BD and angle B is congruent to angle D. So where is that information going to go? What did you say? That was right. What did you say? In the statements, right? So number 1, we're going to say what the given was. So we're going to write down AE bisects BD and we also know that angle B, you can write it underneath, is congruent to angle D. Does anyone remember from yesterday what the first reason always is?
The given.
Good, the given. Okay. What else do we do before we start working the proof?
Put the proof on the bottom.
Okay, so Crystal's reminding us that the proof statement always goes at the bottom. Now, I don't know how many steps this is. So just somewhere near the bottom, I'm going to say triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DBC. I don't know why yet, but I do know that it goes somewhere near the bottom. Okay, what else do we do? Anybody know? What else did we have to do before we started?
Draw our picture.
Draw the picture. Now, in this one, the picture has really already been drawn for us, but we can mark, oh good, we can mark the diagram. Okay, so it says AE bisects BD. So AE cuts BD in half, right? It's going to cut BD in half, that's what it does. So we're going to represent that by saying this BC is congruent to CD. Now, we don't know if the other 2 sets are congruent. We don't know if AC is congruent to CE. It didn't tell me that. All it said was that AE cuts the other one in half. Okay? It also tells me that angle B is congruent to angle D. So let's mark that. Angle B congruent to angle D. Okay, so if I mark angle B congruent to angle D, remember, we're trying to prove that our triangles are congruent. Okay, so Brianna, what were you going to say here?
You're supposed to use 2 marks.
Okay, so Okay, so what you're getting at is what you just said, is that we're going to have to mark vertical angles. Would you guys agree with that?
Yes.
We have a pair of vertical angles up here, right? They make that X. So we're going to mark these with 2 arcs. Okay? You're allowed to mark them. But here's the rule when we're doing proofs. If you mark it in the diagram, you have to write it in the proof. Okay? So we're going to say in our proof, let's make life a little bit easier, guys. Let's put this as angle 1 and this is angle 2. Okay, so let's call our vertical angles angle 1 and angle 2. So step number 2, angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. Can anyone tell me why they're congruent? In your own words, why did we know that angle 1 and angle 2 are congruent? Because they're vertical angles, right? And so we have this thing where if they are vertical angles, then they're congruent. Okay, so we're going to say vertical angles are congruent. And this is my shorthand. Vertical angles are congruent. Sorry. So your reason is just you telling me, why do you know that those things are true? Okay? Now, this part gets a little bit tricky. We marked that BC was congruent to CD. Would you guys agree with that? We marked that these 2 pieces were the same. But did we actually explicitly write BC is congruent to CD? Did we actually write that? Okay. When you're doing this proof, you have to pretend like the person you're writing it for is the complete idiot, that they don't know what those hash marks mean. All right? We all know what the hash marks mean, but when you're writing a proof, you have to explain it as if the person doesn't know what the hash marks mean. So we need to say on step number 3 that BC is congruent to CD. We marked it, right? We marked BC and CD were congruent, but you actually have to say it explicitly. Who can tell me why we know that they were congruent? Why did we mark them congruent? Why did we mark them congruent? Samantha, what did you think?
Because it says that angle B is congruent to angle D, and C is their bisector, or whatever it's called.
Okay, so C would be the midpoint, but we're not necessarily sure about that. Before that, though, it says that AE bisects. And what does bisect mean, guys? Cuts it in half, right? Cuts it into 2 different pieces. So the reason that we know that these are congruent is definition, and we're going to abbreviate that as DEF. Definition of bisected segment. We're going to abbreviate that SEG. Now,
How do you know they were bisected into 2 equal parts?
Because that's the definition of bisect. Bi means 2, so if you 2 sect means sections, right? So 2 sections, 2 that are completely equal parts. That's the definition of bisect, is to cut into equal parts. Right? Like if you think about in science class, you dissected something, you just like opened it up and like cut into it, like Josh was telling us about his shark. But if you bisect something, you're cutting it exactly into 2 parts, 2 equal parts.
Yeah, I knew you cut it into 2 parts.
But, okay, so it means 2 equal parts. Now, these reasons I'm not expecting you to have come up with on your own. That's why we're practicing this, okay? But if you can tell me in your own words why something is happening, that's what I'm looking for. So we're trying to prove that these 2 triangles are congruent. If you look up there, the top 4 things that we listed, do we have one of those top 4 things here in our triangles? Do we have side, 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 or angle, angle, side? Do we have something here? What do we have, Emily?
We have angle, side, angle.
Angle, side, angle. Do you guys see that? We have angle, side, angle in our picture. So we are able to say that we are now finished. This is step number 4. I have said enough information to say that my triangles are congruent. So I'm going to say angle, side, angle, congruency. Angle, side, angle, congruency. And this is finished. We're done. Now, let me explain something to you. Steps 2 and 3 you can flip the order around. Okay, so you can flip the order around of what's in here in the middle. Step number 1 and the last step are always the same, but if you had switched 2 and 3 around and said that the segments were congruent first, it would have been the same thing, okay? So you can switch the order around. So as you're doing your proof, yours might be a little bit different than your neighbor's, and that's okay. All right? Okay, why don't you go ahead and set up the second proof? Just set it up. That's all I want you to do is just set it up. Is it bothering you sitting there? Let's wait till we get finished, okay? You know how to set it up. Step number 1, and then the last step. Step number 1, and then the last step. Are you done with as much as you can do? Okay. Go ahead and set it up. Okay, if you were watching the video, go ahead and pause it and write down. I accidentally forgot to unpause it. So go ahead and pause the video and write this proof down, and then we'll explain the next one. Okay, so let's go ahead and set this up. You know how to set up a proof now. The number 1 is your given. Okay, they've already marked for us that angle A is congruent to angle E. You guys see that? They already marked that for us. Okay, and then it says that AE cuts through BD. So if AE cuts through BD, what do we know about DC and CB? What do we know about those two? They're congruent. Okay, so let's mark that. This is This is congruent to this. Do I know that AC is congruent to CE? Did it say it bisects the other way too? Nope, I don't know that. But I marked them congruent, and if you mark them congruent in the diagram, what do you have to do? You got to write it in your proof. Okay? So the first step of my proof is going to say that DC is congruent to CB. So if you mark it, you write it. You mark it, you write it. Hang on to that thought. I'm coming back to you. You're on the right track, yes. Okay, why do we know that they were congruent? Why do we know that they're congruent? Oh, but there's something in the given that tells us that they're congruent. How did we know that we could mark them congruent? There's a huge word in there. Bisect, right? So what did we write on the front when there was a bisected? Go back. What did we write on the front when it was bisected? Everyone, flip your page over and look at the very first proof. When things were bisected, what did we write as our reason? You guys are saying vertical, and we haven't even talked about that. Thank you. Definition of bisected segments. Do not put vertical angles when you're talking about segments. That makes no sense. Definition of bisected segments. Don't you dare put angles when we're talking about segments. Okay, Brianna, what else did you spy in this diagram? Huh? Well, look in the diagram. What else do you know that could be marked that is not marked? Vertical angles again, right? That's going to be the most popular thing. And let's put angle 1 and angle 2 here to make life a little bit easier. If you're going to say angle 1 and angle 2, you need to make sure you put angle 1 and angle 2 in your diagram. Okay, so we know that angle 1, we know that angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. So if we mark it, we have to write it. So angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. Look back at your previous proofs and find the reason that goes with this one. Okay. Vertical angles, and you can use your angle symbol, are congruent. We should have marked this with 2 arcs because we already had 1 arc marked. Patrick, is this enough information to say that my triangles are congruent?
Yep.
By which postulate? Side, angle, angle, which is the same thing as angle, angle, side. So we will say angle, angle, side, congruency. So then I will say that this is step number 4. Angle, angle, side, congruency. I'm going to take a quick break and come back. And I'll have another thing for you and I'll go over that with you in a minute. Okay? So take about, be back at 2:10. Okay, let's do one more and then we will take a break. Any questions on this one as we're going? Do you feel like you're kind of getting the hang of it? A little bit? Did you say no? You know how to set them up, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and set up the next one. Go ahead and set up the next one. Again, you get points on your quizzes and homework and whatever for even just setting up the proof correctly. And these are all segments and should have segment bars above them. I don't know why that didn't translate. Do you notice in this one, we're not ending with triangles are congruent. Do you guys notice that? That's different. And all the other ones we've ended with our triangles being congruent. So when you are trying to end with segments being congruent, do you guys remember hearing this in the video? Look over here to the right. Do you remember hearing the CPCTC thing? Do you vaguely remember that? I was gone that day. It was on a video. CPCTC? Okay, what CPCTC means is, hey, if you can say that these two triangles are congruent, then everything else is going to match up. That's what that means, okay? So when we end our proof with something other than triangles, it means that you need to first get your triangles to be congruent. So our goal is still the same, to get our triangles to be congruent. So let's mark some things. That says MA is congruent to TA. So MA is congruent to TA. Let's mark that. That's already written, so I'm good to go. And then it says point A is the midpoint of SR. A is the midpoint of SR. So what does that mean if A is the midpoint?
It means,
Brianna?
on each side of the A, they're congruent.
Okay, so what she means by that is SA is congruent to AR. And we're going to mark that with 2 hash marks. Thank you, Miss Carolyn. We're going to mark that with 2 hash marks since we already have 1. But if you mark it, you have to write it. And we don't have anywhere that says that SA is congruent to AR, right? We haven't written that. So let's use that as step number 2. SA is congruent to AR. Okay? SA is congruent to AR. In your own words, why did we know we were allowed to mark them congruent? Why did we know that? Emily?
They were vertical.
Not vertical. What's that other word? What else is given to you? Close. It kind of means the same thing as bisected. It's the midpoint, right? And if they tell me that something is the midpoint, then that means that they're the same. Like the two sides are the same. So that was good. It splits it in half. Kind of like bisect. So it seems like it's the same thing as bisect. So we're going to say definition of midpoint. Now again, I don't expect you to come up with these on your own. That's why we're doing some together. But in your proofs that you're going to do today in your homework, you're going to use these definitions that we're using in our notes, okay? All right, does anybody else see anything up there in my diagram that's not marked that should be marked? What? What, Belinda? What?
I'll just say something.
What did you say? Yes? CJ, what do you see in the diagram that should be marked that's not marked?
The vertex angle.
Vertical angles, excellent. So is that where you were going to say, Belinda?
I'll say angle, I didn't say vertical.
But you meant them. Okay, let's say angle 1 and angle 2. Let's mark angle 1 and angle 2 to make life easier. Otherwise, we'd have to say like angle MAS or whatever. So this angle is congruent to this angle. But if we have to mark it, Patrick, we have to write it. If you mark it, you write it. So step number 3, I'm going to say angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. Look back at your other proofs. Why do you know that angle 1 is congruent to angle 2? Vertical angles are congruent. Good. Okay. You should be seeing that we have side angle side. You guys see that? We have side angle side. So now we're allowed to say it's not the last step, it's step number 4. We can say our triangles are congruent. So if I said triangle MAR, you would match that with what? Fill in the blank on your own paper. If I said MAR, and you guys did this in your IXL homework, if you have done it, triangle MAR matches up with what? That's what I want you to write there. I'm sorry, MAS. Wow. There is no MAR. There is no MAR triangle. That doesn't make a triangle. MAS. Excuse me. MAS congruent to what? Who wants to give me their answer? Ish. Okay. Now here's the thing. Angle M. I need everybody to look at the board for this, or on my computer. I started with M and I went past 1 hash mark. If I start at R and go past 1 hash mark, I'm going actually past 2 instead. So if I start at M, yeah. If I start at M and want to go past 1 hash mark, then you have to do T, right? So it's going to be TAR, should be the triangle. And I heard you guys say it together. Why are these congruent? What rule? Side angle side. Now this is new. We're finished, okay? Here's the rule. The rule says if you can prove that this triangle is the same as this triangle, then everything else matches up, right? And if you look at step number 4, it does say that the triangles are congruent, right? which means everything else is going to match up. So that means this is step number 5, and reason number 5 is CP, CTC. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Please make yourself a note. Please make yourself a note here. Step number 5. Patrick, wake up. If you end with congruent segments. Okay, so we ended our proof with congruent segments. The step before should be congruent triangles. Should be triangle congruent to a triangle. Okay? So if you end with congruent segments in your proof, the step right before that should to say that your triangles are congruent. Okay? Any questions?